So, getting back to the subject of things St. James never did in Spain, after he never visited the country and didn't found the Spanish church, he wasn't buried in Santiago de Compostela and then didn't lead the charge at the Battle of Clavijo in 834. A bit of context here. In the early 9th century, Spain is divided into a smaller Christian kingdom in the north, called the Asturias, and a larger Muslim kingdom in the south, the Emirate of Cordoba, because North African peoples called the Moors had invaded Spain and brought their Muslim religion with them. There had then been continual warfare between the Christians and the Muslims. In the year 783, the king of the Asturias, called Silo, died, and Alfonso II was elected as his successor, but the throne was stolen by Mauregatus the usurper, an illegitimate son of King Alfonso I, by a Moorish serf. With Muslim backing, Mauregatus raised an army and took the throne of the Asturias. He then made peace with the Emirate of Cordoba, but at a heavy price. A tribute of 100 virgins was to be paid every year to the Emir of Cordoba in exchange for the peace. In time, Mauregatus died, and the rule passed briefly to Bermudo I, then Alfonso II, and after his death, Ramiro I. When it came time to pay the tribute of virgins, Ramiro looked at the girls fated to be sent as tribute to the Muslims and found he could not do it. This meant that war was now inevitable, so Ramiro went and prayed at Santiago de Compostela for help and guidance from St. James, and he promised great offerings if St. James would guide the Christian forces to victory over the Muslim armies. Ramiro then boldly took the offensive, despite having a smaller army, and marched into the Emirate of Cordoba. Hearing that the Muslims were assembling near Clavijo, he marched his army there to try and catch the Muslim forces before they were fully assembled. When the Christians came into view of the vast army encampment near Clavijo, though, they faltered, when suddenly St. James himself appeared, riding through the ranks of the army, radiating a holy light. With a voice like thunder, he proclaimed that the Christian cause was just, and that he had come to lead them to victory himself. With a cry of "Santiago!" he rallied the army and led the charge. The fighting was fierce, but with St. James himself leading the Christian army, they could not be stopped. St. James fell upon the Muslim soldiers in a fury and killed so many Muslims that he acquired the epithet Santiago Matamoros, St. James the Moor Killer, and his attack at Clavijo became a central image of the Reconquista and a popular subject in art. In his aspect as Santiago Matamoros, St. James is depicted riding a white horse and wielding a sword. After the Battle of Clavijo, Ramiro I returned to his kingdom and honoured his promise to St. James. He offered all of the plunder and the booty from the campaign to the church, and he was so grateful for the miraculous intervention that he not only gave the church all the booty, but he also arranged an annual offering to be paid to the Church of St. James. But in bad news for St. James, not only did he not lead the charge in the Battle of Clavijo, but the entire Battle of Clavijo never happened either. Ramiro I never promised or agreed to give St. James a special offering annually, and the Emirate of Cordoba never asked for or received a tribute of 100 virgins. There's just no record of the Battle of Clavijo in contemporary Asturian or Muslim sources, which provide a good account of other battles over the same period. It's first mentioned in the chronicles of Rodrigo Jimenez de Dada, a 13th century Archbishop of Toledo. He writes that the battle was in 834, but Ramiro I wasn't actually in power in 834, so in later sources the date was changed to 844 to be more plausible. The tribute of 100 virgins, that was also a central part of the myth, contributed to anti-Muslim sentiment. It's interesting that in the story it's Mauregatus who agrees to the tribute, because he was a real ruler and was of mixed-race birth, which was unusual. As a person of mixed-race heritage, he was more open to and encouraging of marriages between the Christian and Muslim communities, something that had been rare before his reign. These interracial marriages were a bit controversial, and the tribute of Christian girls to the Emir of Cordoba might be a reference to Mauregatus being more permissive of interracial marriage. But there was definitely never a tribute of virgin girls paid to the Emirate of Cordoba. There was also an annual tribute to St. James, instituted from the 12th century, called the Voto de Santiago. The tax was levied in all of the Christian kingdoms of Spain from about 1150 until it was abolished in 1808 by Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, while he was King of Spain. Again, we can only imagine the conversations that must have happened in the church to come up with this story, and I've been so bold as to offer a little reconstruction. Wow, so everyone believes that St. James is buried here now. This is going great. Yeah, but now we need a really good miracle, to take it to the next level. So maybe a miraculous vision, or St. James cures the sick and heals the lame? Nah, nothing like that. I want St. James to be the kind of saint who kicks ass and takes names. I'm looking for a miracle with a real impact, something that changes history. Are there any good stories like that? Well, there's the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, probably the most significant history-changing miracle. The Emperor Constantine was fighting Maxentius, both of whom were pagans at the time. The night before the battle, an angel appeared to Constantine in a vision, bearing the cross and saying, "Under this sign you will conquer." The next morning, Constantine instructed his soldiers to paint crosses on their shields, and then his forces went on to win an extraordinary victory. So then Constantine converted the Roman Empire to Christianity, and the rest is history. No, he didn't do that actually. He continued to use pagan and Sol Invictus iconography, but he did issue the Edict of Milan, which stopped the persecution of Christians, allowing the faith to start growing. What a rubbish story. An angel just appears to one guy in a vision before the battle, doesn't get involved at all in the actual battle, and Constantine didn't even convert to Christianity himself. Well, history is like that. I mean, things are rarely so simple and straightforward. Yeah, well, I mean, that's why history sucks and we should totally ignore it. So, here's what I'm thinking. Let's say there's a village of Muslims who don't believe in Jesus. Yeah, sure, like a village of Samaritans in the Bible. Exactly. So then St. James appears and says we should smite them with fire. Oh, yeah. And then Jesus says, "Ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of, for the Son of God is not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." Except, in this version, Jesus isn't around, so St. James saddles his horse, leads the charge, and gets to smiting. And he's smiting left and right and just killing all the Muslims. We'll call him the Moor Killer. And everyone knows it's St. James because he looks just like he does in the paintings. No, don't be silly. Everyone knows who he is because he shouts his name when he charges. Look, I just don't think you're getting my vision here. Forget all that biblical stuff with parables and moral lessons. The new St. James is the star of a medieval epic of knights and chivalry, a battle of good versus evil. So, to set the scene, the Muslims have invaded, dark hordes of them pouring into our holy lands, and all seems lost for Spain. Then a magnificent figure appears, St. James, returning from death to save the land he loved. He appears, glowing with God's light and mounted on a glorious white horse, and he rallies the righteous, handsome Christian white knights with great hair and gilded armour to his side, and the sight of him brings hope to Christians everywhere. And the evil, dark Muslim hordes are there with their terrible teeth and their face-covering helmets and their nasty black weapons. And St. James looks down on the Muslims and says, "By the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, I will purge this land." And all the handsome Christian knights in their shining armour are like, "Let's go, lads." So St. James leads the attack, and he shouts his own name as he charges so that everyone knows it's him. He goes, "Santiago!" as he leads the glorious Christian cavalry charging downhill into the ugly teeth of the enemy forces. And the Muslims get all their horrible pointy black weapons out to kill the Christians, but the light of God shines out of St. James and blinds the Muslims. Then St. James crashes into the Muslim army, and the blessed forces of Christ are smiting hard. St. James himself is just hacking and slashing his way through the Moorish lines. And the Muslims can't take it, and they all turn around and start running away. And the Christian knights are like, "Come back and fight, you cowards!" And the Muslims are all running away, and the Christians are all laughing and killing a few stragglers here and there for fun, and saying, "Hooray for St. James!" as all the terrified Muslims run away. And St. James is like, "From now on, call me Santiago Matamoros, St. James the Moor Killer." And the Christians are all shouting, "Hooray for St. James! St. James saved Spain! Santiago! And Santiago Matamoros!" Wow, that really is a pretty wild miracle. Yeah, and we should say the Muslims demanded a tribute of 100 virgins, so everyone knows they're the bad guys. Sure, I mean, makes sense. And then after the battle, everyone is so grateful to St. James for saving Spain that they pay us an annual tribute forever. After the Battle of Clavijo, but before they made it up, the Order of Santiago was formed. They were a brotherhood of knights, like the Knights Templar or the Knights Hospitaller, but the Order of Santiago was dedicated to protecting the pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela and expelling the Muslims from Spain. The knights needed a new symbol with more military overtones and began using the Cross of St. James. It's like a traditional cross, but depicted in red with a fleur-de-lis on each arm of the cross, except for the longest one, which has been sharpened to a point. It is said that this symbol originated in the Crusades, when crusading knights carried a sort of sharpened cross they could use to put in the ground to pray. The Spanish call it the Santiago cross or the Cruz Espada, meaning sword cross. On some level, this cross is a blood-red sword and represents taking up arms for the faith. It is forever associated with Santiago Matamoros and the fight to evict the Muslims from Spain. It has been used as a military symbol ever since, first by the Knights of St. James, but even continuing today. This is the current badge of the Spanish army, and these are regimental badges which have recently been in use. This is not without some controversy. When Spanish troops were deployed on a peacekeeping mission to Iraq with jackets and badges showing the Cross of St. James, the centre-right paper El Mundo published an editorial saying, "To put the Cross of Santiago on the uniforms of Spanish soldiers demonstrates an absolute ignorance of the psychology of the society in which they will have to carry out their mission." And then it added, "It would be difficult to come up with a symbol more offensive to the Shiite population than this cross." So, the iconography of St. James is interesting. The shell represents St. James as the patron saint of pilgrims. In this aspect, he has a large hat, a staff, and humble clothes. It represents pilgrimage. The cross of St. James represents St. James as Santiago Matamoros, the legendary slayer of heathens. In this aspect, he rides a white horse and wields a sword. It represents using violence to achieve your political aims. No discussion of Christian iconography would be complete without mentioning the greatest iconography ever created. The cross represents Jesus' suffering and death at the hands of the Romans. It represents self-sacrifice and solidarity with the victims of oppression. Anyway, let's return to the history of the Knights of St. James. In 1174, King Alonso VIII of Castile gave the knights the town of Uxlis, where their central monastery was established, and then in 1175 a papal bull was issued by Pope Alexander III giving assent to the formation of this new religious order. King Ferdinand II of Leon gave them Cáceres, and the King of Castile, Alonso IX, gave them Italia Castle. The Infanta, Sancho of Castile, gave them the convent of San Marcos, and Martin Alfonso, the illegitimate son of the king, donated the monastery of Sancti Spiritus. They received various other towns, cities, and convents over the years, till at its height, the Order of Santiago held 83 commanderies, 2 cities, 178 boroughs and villages, 200 parishes, 5 hospitals, 5 convents, and 1 college at Salamanca. The number of knights was then around 400, and they could muster 1,000 lances. They had possessions in Portugal, France, Italy, Hungary, and even Palestine. The masters of the order lived in castles or fortified towns and drew income from rent on the order's properties in the area. Each area supporting a master is called an encomienda. Each encomienda had to support the knight commander and the other knights living there, and to pay to arm a certain number of spearmen. All of these formed the armed retinue, or the army of the order, which answered to the orders of its Grand Master. And the Grand Masters of the Order of Santiago took their responsibility to defend Christian Spain seriously. They frequently called up the whole order to participate in battles against Muslim forces through the 13th and 14th centuries. So the order fought at Alarcos, where it was a hard-fought battle, but they were defeated. They led the forces at Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, a decisive victory for the Christian forces, with the Order of Santiago leading the breakthrough charge. They then next fought at the Battle of Mochlin in 1280, which was an absolute disaster. The order was lured into a trap, and almost every knight of St James was killed. But the order limped on, and next fought in the Battle of Navarrete, where they again lost. That was in the Castilian Civil War. Two Grand Masters died at the Siege of Lisbon in 1384, which probably means they died of plague, because that just broke out at the Siege of Lisbon. And then the last Grand Master to be slain in battle was at the Battle of Valverde, where the Grand Master of the Order of Santiago was slain by Nuno Alvarez Pereira, whose decisive victory secured an independent Portugal. And Nuno himself has been canonized as a saint. So a Portuguese saint killed the last Grand Master of Santiago. In fact, during the Reconquista, the image of St. James was so associated with war that Santiago became a war cry, shouted at opposing armies as the Spanish bared down on them in a charge. The Knights of St. James had relatively mild religious obligations compared to other orders of crusading knights, and were even allowed to marry with the king's permission. This contributed to the order spreading rapidly and becoming the most powerful of the various orders of religious knights in Spain, eclipsing the older orders of Calatrava and Alcantara. The glorious military service of the Knights of St. James came to an abrupt end in 1493 when the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella took control of the order. This was formally approved in a papal bull issued by Pope Adrian VI. The marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella united the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, giving them unprecedented regional power. They were actually second cousins, and so they needed permission from the Pope to marry, but this was not forthcoming for political reasons, and so someone made a fake papal bull and they got married anyway. Once united, though, their combined power reshaped Spain. Ferdinand and Isabella achieved a significant consolidation of power by taking control of the Order of Santiago, and it is a notable event, but it's often overshadowed by their achievements the year before, in 1492. In 1492, they conquered Granada, the last Muslim kingdom, ending almost 800 years of Muslim occupation on the Iberian Peninsula and completing the Reconquista, a goal that Christian rulers had had for centuries. After that, there was a public burning of all Arabic manuscripts that could be found, and the remaining Muslims were given a choice between baptism or exile. The majority accepted baptism, and by the year 1500, Cardinal Cisneros was able to report that there is now no one in the city who is not a Christian, and all the mosques are churches. Also in 1492, the Catholic monarchs issued the Alhambra Decree on the 31st of March, ordering the expulsion of practicing Jews from the Crown of Castile and Aragon and its territories and possessions by the 31st of July that year. So they gave them about 2 months to get out. Of Spain's estimated 300,000 Jews, a total of 200,000 converted to Catholicism to remain in Spain, and between 40,000 and 100,000 remained Jewish and were expelled. Finally, in 1492, Queen Isabella agreed to finance a Genoese sailor called Christopher Columbus with a bold dream to sail west to China. He never did find China, but his voyages opened the Americas to European conquest, changing world history. So, 1492 was quite a year for Ferdinand and Isabella. History remembers them as the Catholic monarchs because they expelled the Jews and Muslims from Spain and made everyone who wasn't Catholic already convert to Catholicism. They then started an organization called the Spanish Inquisition to root out any Muslims or Jews who were practicing their religion in secret, so-called crypto-Jews or crypto-Muslims. According to modern estimates, around 150,000 people were persecuted for various offences during the 3-century duration of the Spanish Inquisition, of whom between 3,000 and 5,000 were executed. They were awarded the Latin title Rex Catholicismus, anglicised as the Most Catholic King or Most Catholic Majesty by Pope Alexander VI, also in 1493. So even the Pope was saying, wow, these guys are pretty Catholic. So when Ferdinand and Isabella took control of the Order of Santiago, they didn't need a private army in their kingdom dedicated to fighting a war that was over, but they liked the idea of a holy organisation of Spanish aristocracy dedicated to defending the Catholic faith. As Grand Master of the Order, the king could continue to appoint knights, hand out encomiendas to his favourites, and take them away if there was any disloyalty. Many prominent families among the Spanish nobility had a tradition of service in the Order of Santiago, and so maintaining the institution was a way for the king to maintain and extend an influential network of aristocrats. The pageantry and symbolism of the Knights of St. James was also politically powerful, so the Order of Santiago continued to operate with the king as its Grand Master, except that after 1493 the knights were never again called to take to the field of battle. Being made a Knight of the Order of St. James became more of a symbolic honour, handed out to the Spanish nobility for loyalty, granted to generals and governors for good service, and used to reward foreign allies. The obligation of the Knights of St. James to saddle up and fight heathen armies was more and more symbolic. In 1519, just 26 years after the voyage of Columbus, the Spanish adventurer Hernán Cortés invaded Mexico, ultimately annexing the territory for the Spanish king. Before returning to Mexico, though, let's just acknowledge the extraordinary success of the Church in convincing the Spanish royalty and nobility it was their patriotic duty to protect pilgrims on the way to Santiago de Compostela, and that they should donate their lands, their castles, and even their lives to the cause. Here's a reconstruction of the conversation.